Timeless with Julie Hartman live. It is Tuesday, May 28th, 2024. I'm Julie Hartman. It is great, as always, to be with you. To those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. I am live Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, right here on YouTube with our dear Sean McConnell. Hello, Sean-Z. Happy belated Memorial Day.
Yeah, I always feel weird about saying Happy Memorial Day.
I know, that's true. That's a very good point. Yeah. Should say a appropriately solemn and perhaps leaving some moments of joy Memorial Day. That's what we should wish people. I don't know if you're being really appropriate. But yes, we're here on YouTube live Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And also, I need to shout out my show with Dennis Prager, which is live every Sunday at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, also here on this YouTube channel. So welcome to those new and old. 844-861-5537 is the call-in number, 844-861-5537. And as always, you can use the chat as long as you keep it classy. I'm seeing already there's someone. Hello to you too, AP Unfiltered. Again, I was going to wish everyone happy Memorial Day, but you've put that one in my head now. So I hope everyone had a, as I said, appropriately solemn and somewhat joyful Memorial Day. So as I said at the beginning of the show, and as I always say, I mentioned the date, and today is May 28th, 2024. And that is particularly relevant to our show today because right now marks 4 years since George Floyd died. I don't know about you, but I have that date seared into my memory. George Floyd died on May 25th, 2020. So we're 4 years and 3 days away from that event. And so I wanted to dedicate the entire show today to discussing how that event changed America, changed me, and changed the world. Because it really, really did. It's amazing that it has been 4 years. That seems both very long and very short. But you look back at all that has transpired in those nearly 1,000 days, or what is it, over 1,000 days. Again, as I always say when I try to do math live on the air, history major, not math major. I should know by now to maybe avoid doing those multiplication. Yes, what is it, 1,200 days, roughly. Think about all that has happened in the past 4 years. It's really amazing. If you went back to this time right now in 2020, January 6th, hadn't happened yet. The whole 2020 election, you're cutting in with the math. Yes, correct me. Give me the exact date.
1460.
Hey, it's hard to do math when you're live on the air, and it's especially hard when your brain doesn't work that way. Thank you, Sean-Z. But again, let's really consider this because it's amazing. If you went back to yourself 4 years ago today, and someone went up to you and said, "Hey, you know about the Hunter Biden laptop?" You would have had no idea what they were talking about. If someone went up to you and said, "What does the date January 6th mean to you?" You would have said, "I don't know. It's my, ugly cousin's birthday." I mean, what did the date January 6th mean to any of us before January 6th, 2021? At least that's when I learned that in the Constitution, that's the date that they chose to certify the results of an election. I didn't know that as a Harvard history major. None of us knew about January 6th, obviously. Even if you went back to yourself 4 years ago today and someone went up to you and said, "What is the acronym DEI mean?" I don't think a lot of people could answer the question. Either DEI was, I mean, we know that sort of the early principles of DEI go back about a decade. But as that term, the acronym DEI, I think that's a post-George Floyd thing. Certainly the way that it's been institutionalized, but you understand my point. The amount that has happened in these 4 years is staggering. And I really trace it back to that terrible day, May 25th, 2020. That is the day when, in my view, and I would be so interested to hear your thoughts, please comment in the chat. I also shouted out the call-in number, but today I have a direct line here to the chat, and we'll probably be using the chat primarily. If I could distill the impact of George Floyd's death into a single sentence, it would be that is when the hard left, which is different from liberalism, and Dennis Prager always makes that distinction, but I would say it was when the hard left leached into the mainstream of not just American politics, but the American way of life. The way that we talk with each other, the way that we live, the things our kids are learning when they go to school, the policies that our government enacts. I think it really was that turning point when the leftist elements that were existing in our country really leached into the mainstream. I mean, think about it. Think about these examples that we bring up. The Oregon Department of Education saying that finding one right answer in math is white supremacy. That did not exist prior to 2020. There were some crazies who, spoke that way and thought that way. Wokeism was definitely on the rise. But it leached into the institutions, into Department of Education codes, for instance, after 2020. All these changes to policing, we forget how big of a turning point this George Floyd death was. The cash bail laws that we talk about a lot on the show, the record numbers of retirements among police officers, all of that stuff is a post George Floyd world, and it is a result of what happened on May 25th, 2020. I just want to show you two quick photos here because I said that it not just changed America, it changed the world. Do you remember? It's amazing sometimes how quickly we can forget things. Do you remember that not only there were George Floyd protests here in the United States, but they were all over the world? The first picture I'm going to show you is when I was in Israel in 2022, March of 2022. And I was in the West Bank, and specifically in the town of Bethlehem. And not to get into a whole discussion about the situation in the West Bank, but there are different zones in the West Bank where there are Jewish communities, there are Palestinian communities, and then there are some areas where they're kind of mixed together. And as many are probably aware from the amount that Israel is being discussed these days, there are these walls that the Israeli government erected in the West Bank to separate, really for security reasons. I don't want to get into it. This is not the point of the discussion, but here is a photo of what I saw when I was in Israel. This is on the wall, one of the walls in the West Bank. It's a picture of George Floyd in the West Bank in Israel. They have a mural of George Floyd. Show you another picture. This is in Syria. This is a mural that an artist created amidst the rubble of the Syrian civil war. And we see here a picture of George Floyd with "I can't breathe, no to racism." They say that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. And that is so true. If you look around the world, there's a great listener of this show who is actually lives in Germany. Shout out to Will. He's 26. He's been listening to Timeless and Dennis and Julie, and he emailed me. And by the way, just to shout out my email, it's julie@julie-hartman.com. You never know what could happen if you email me, because when I was in Berlin about a year ago, I actually met up with Will. And Will was, by the way, I can't promise that I'll meet up with you if you email me. I want to say that as a disclaimer, but I truly do love hearing from people who are listeners of the show. And when I met up with Will in Berlin, he was telling me that in Germany, he could trace all of the conversations about transgenderism to when it became a thing in the United States. And he said that he could trace a lot of conversations about, policing in Germany to when it happened in the United States. In other words, he confirmed what I just said, that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. You look at various trends in other countries, and, some people may listen to this and go, oh, it sounds so self-righteous, America as this hegemonic trendsetter. It's the truth. And we need to realize that and understand that it comes with responsibility, that when things happen here, a lot of the world looks to it and reacts. And so George Floyd has become a symbol worldwide of resistance. Of course, it's, a different kind of resistance depending on the country. But it's so interesting to me that many people worldwide use an American figure and use an American symbol to advocate for what it is that they are advocating for. In the West Bank, obviously, it's against what they see as Israeli occupation. In the Syrian civil war, I don't know exactly who painted that mural, but people are using it to say, I am identifying this individual as a symbol of the government or the tyranny or the dynamic that I am resisting. So George Floyd changed everything is the TLDR of the discussion today. And those of you who listen to the show know that I try not to make the show about me. I try to make it about the people who I learn from and the topics that I learn. On this show, I have done, my gosh, we could just rattle off a long list of all of the various people I've interviewed, FBI agents, CIA agents. I had a minimalist on the show. I had a magician on the show. I've done shows on flags, on handwriting analysis, on history, politics. This has really been a show about a wide variety of subjects. And the through line is that I always endeavor to bring to you these magnificent things about life and about human nature and about the human existence that I have discovered. And so I try not to make the show about me, but today I'm going to make an exception to that rule because George Floyd, in addition to changing America, in addition to changing the world, George Floyd changed me. It is because of that event on May 25th, 2020, that I'm a conservative, that I met Dennis Prager, that I have the show with him, Dennis and Julie, and that I'm even sitting here looking at you right now, talking with you, and have this whole show. Seriously, it is not an exaggeration to trace almost everything in my life to that event. And so my story, I think, is, yes, it's a story about me, but it's really an American story. It's really kind of a story about what many of us have been through over the past few years. And I know that I'm not alone in kind of having George Floyd's death change my life. For instance, the other day I was listening to Brett Cooper. Brett Cooper was on the Megyn Kelly show. And I didn't even know this. Sean, I don't know if you knew this about Brett Cooper. She talked about how 2020 was her awakening moment. When she really realized how corrupt and despicable leftism had gotten in our country. I'm literally watching her on Megyn Kelly going, oh my gosh, she had the same thing that I did. Amala Ekpunobi, a great friend of mine and a fantastic conservative commentator. George Floyd's death was her whole awakening. You should check out her Stories of Us PragerU video. She talks about how she grew up in a leftist household. Her mother was a Black Lives Matter agitator. She has a Black Lives Matter tattoo on her forearm. But it was George Floyd's death and everything that metastasized after that red-pilled her. I'll give you another example. Xavier DuRousseau at PragerU. He had another very similar transformation where he was, I believe, working for Black Lives Matter as a BLM agitator. And then he, like Amala, had this whole, awakening moment. I have friends who aren't in the public eye, but I have friends who also trace their political awakenings to May 25th, 2020. So those of you who are watching, who are in my age range, and I'm 24 years old, you're in Gen Z, I'm confident that many of you can relate to what I'm saying, because I'm telling you who maybe aren't in my generation now, that this event was huge for Gen Z. It was huge for making conservatives in Gen Z, case in point, and the aforementioned examples are case in point. But it was also, I think, huge for making liberals or leftists in Gen Z. As much as I'm pointing to people who became more conservative as a result of George Floyd, there are a lot of people my age who I have seen have taken a turn to the hard left because of George Floyd. Xavier DuRousseau made this comment, and I have to give him credit for it. We were chatting and we were talking about how this event changed both of us. And he said, no one is the same after 2020. You either woke up and you turned conservative or you didn't. And you became more left. Of course, there's some exceptions, but I really think for most people, they either saw the truth or they buried themselves deeper in the lies. So let's trace back to when Julie Hartman discovered the truth. This is a really, I gotta tell you, it's a really thrilling thing to go back and kind of reminisce about 4 years later. Just going to quickly read the chat. That's very interesting. I'm seeing someone from Gen Z, Christian Watson. Thank you for writing. No one event was a catalyst. A long series of reading, learning, studying brought me to conservatism. I'm Gen Z. Well, thank you for writing that. I think that for a lot of people, still, George Floyd's death was sort of the shocking moment that woke them from their slumber, that sent them down a path of reading, learning, and studying. That's what happened with me, as you're about to hear. That George Floyd was sort of the earthquake that changed the way I view things. And then I went down the path of what you were saying, because really, to become a conservative, I'm glad that you commented this, it really does take reading, learning, and studying. Because we are so buried in the leftist brainwash when we turn on the TV, with the entertainment we consume, with social media, that in order to learn the truth, it actually does take that kind of effort that you observed, Christian. I also want to point to someone else's comment. Tessa Jane is saying, wow, this is very interesting. You're saying that October 7th was your George Floyd moment. That's a big deal of a comment, because I have seen people, I've seen friends of mine, actually a lot of friends of mine now that I think about it, who, for whom October 7th was their George Floyd moment. And you're also Gen Z. That's super interesting. Okay, well, we'll follow up with that. I actually have more to say about that. But isn't that interesting that it takes these kind of huge events like George Floyd's death or October 7th to shake people from their slumber? We're going to follow up with that. But let me tell you, before I had the talk show, before I was even connected with Dennis Prager, what Julie Hartman was like. In many ways, I feel like I was similar to how I am now. I think the core of me is the same. But I was a liberal for a lot of my life. In fact, this is such a funny anecdote. When I showed up freshman year at Harvard, you want to know the first club that I joined? Sean, you don't know this. The Harvard College Democrats. Isn't that funny? I went to the first meeting and we sat around and said our pronouns. This was 2018. Pronouns weren't such a big deal then. But Julie Hartman joined the Harvard College Democrats. Dear God, I'll never be able to live that one down when I showed up to school. But I was a liberal. I was never a leftist. I wasn't crazy woke. But I definitely thought that conservatives were bigoted. Specifically, I thought they were bigoted on abortion. I really just didn't understand conservative opposition to abortion. I thought that they were bigoted on gay marriage. I sort of considered conservatives to be these very antiquated, uber traditional, and yes, kind of bigoted people. And so, I'm in college, kind of coasting along as the liberal. And then the kind of a precursor to my big red pill moment with George Floyd was actually COVID. Because I was a sophomore in college. It was March of 2020. And Harvard announced that we were being sent home and we had to go online to finish our courses. And again, at that time, I was a liberal, so I thought, wow, this is a good thing. This pandemic is really, a terrible event and requires us to go home and to social distance. And so I was fine, with all of the lockdown stuff. Went home, was in lockdown with my parents for months and months. And I remember, though, seeing posts on social media that, as I said, were sort of like the precedent to my big red pill moment. They were little micro doses, if you will, of miniature red pills, because I saw some people who were just so extreme with COVID. And in this episode, I'm going to be putting up pictures of social media posts that I have from 2020. I screenshotted, thank God, so many pictures from what my peers, my friends, people in my community were posting about COVID and about BLM. So we're going to take a walk down memory lane. But thank God I have this stuff, because we can't forget that this happened and that people were so crazy and they were so entitled and they were so self-righteous. It was gross. So I remember during COVID, even though I was a liberal, I was on the bandwagon with the whole N95 and the lockdown stuff. I even remember seeing some people on social media who I think went way too far. So to resurrect one of the screenshots that I have in my archives, here's one. This is a girl who I went to high school with. This is just one example. And again, people who are watching this, I can say with certainty that you know people who were like this, because this was an epidemic of entitlement. So this girl posts this thing during COVID and she goes, ready? If you aren't staying home and social distancing, and on top of that are actively posting about that fact, go F yourself. Oh my God. She continues, you're an idiot and so entitled. Reflect on your motivations to do that and consider how your actions affect other people. And then there's just more of the tirade. And then she ends, because social media is a conduit of information, you have no excuse. You can't pretend to be unaware of what's happening. You're being actively negligent and by extension, actively cruel. So I would see stuff like that and I would be like, it really disillusioned me in a lot of ways, because I thought when I saw that, first of all, who made you in charge? You're a 19, 20-year-old girl kicking back in your parents' house in LA, and you're trying to be the police officer for people who you see on social media who are choosing to go outside. You're not the police officer. It struck me as so pompous and so superciliousness. Like, listen to me, go F yourself. You're an idiot and you're entitled. Like, I am holier than thou and I get to scold you. It was just gross. And there was also a situation in my personal life that I think exposed me to sort of the other side of what was going on during COVID. And that is what happened with my sister Gina. For those of you who watch Dennis and Julie, you may know, sometimes I talk about it, that I have two older sisters, one who's 33, one who's 32. My 32-year-old sister is named Gina, and she has very severe autism. And she lives in a group home here in Los Angeles. And during COVID, she was living in a different group home than she's living in now. But during that time, we were not allowed to see her in her group home because of COVID. For 2 to 3 months, we were completely forbidden from seeing her. And at that time, what was it? She was 28 years old, so it was 4 years ago. She's a 28-year-old woman. I, at the time, was, again, doing my math live on the air. I was 20 years old. We're young. We're not immunocompromised. We didn't have a huge risk of dying of COVID. And I was not allowed to see my sister, my nonverbal autistic sister, in her group home for months. And it was horrible. She doesn't understand what COVID is. She's very, very disabled, very cognitively disabled. She has like the mental capacity of a 2 or a 3-year-old. She doesn't understand what is going on. All she knows is that she's locked in her house. She didn't get to go to any of her activities. She didn't get to leave the house. She's locked in her house. She doesn't get to see her family. It was so cruel and disgusting because the state of California would not allow us to go in and see her. And then after a few months where we were completely forbidden from seeing her, we finally were able to, but get a load of this. We had to stay in our car, pull up to her group home, roll down the windows. We all had to wear masks. And she stood on the grass in her group home behind a fence with a mask 12 feet away from us. And that's how we could visit with her. We were yelling over the masks. Imagine being 12 feet away from someone. You're in a car. Everybody's wearing masks. It was like talking like you can't hear the other person. And my poor darling sister had no idea what was going on. She missed it. She wanted to come out and touch us. She was forbidden from touching us. It was so insanely irrational and cruel. And it's so antithetical to me to talk about personal situations with me. I so don't usually do this on the show, but I have to tell you all about this because it was crazy and it was so hard for our family. And I know so many people can relate. You know, I'm seeing comments in the chat. Grandparents had to die alone. People who are in homes, you know, whether it's other handicapped people like my sister or the elderly, were forbidden from seeing their families. And so as many of us were dealing with this reality of COVID, of having a family member really suffer as a result of the extent of the irrationality, there were, I'm going to try not to say something unkind. There were expletives like this girl who were, you know, condescending to the rest of us about how we were not sufficiently COVID safe. Come on. So entitled. So that was kind of microdose of red pill for me, seeing that kind of COVID entitlement. And then May 25th, 2020 happened. I remember being in my parents' living room because, again, I was at home, totally locked down, unable to see my friends, unable to see my sister. I was just doing nothing all day. And I remember looking at the TV and watching cable news. And I want you all right now to remember where you were when you found out about George Floyd. Because it's sort of, for us, and especially for those in my generation, it's the equivalent of where were you on 9/11? That, at least in my view, or where were you on October 7th, as someone wrote. I remember I was in my parents' living room and seeing on local news that video of the knee on the neck come up, And I'm watching that, and I was so horrified. I was so jolted by it. And I swear to God, I remember turning to my mom and I said to her, "This is why Black people hate the police." That was my reaction. I said, I was a liberal. I said, this is why Black people hate the police. And I think we can all acknowledge, and again, I know I'm shouting out the chat a lot, but I love hearing from you and what your experiences were with this, and if you agree or disagree with me. I'm curious to hear what you think about what I'm about to say. You know, I hope and think that we can all agree that that was a horrible, horrible, horrible video. I mean, Derek Chauvin of course, so much has come out in the wake of it that George Floyd had, 3 times the amount of lethal fentanyl in his system, and that Derek Chauvin, when he was putting the knee on the neck, he was actually following the police protocol at the time. There was in the Minneapolis Police Department a protocol of a knee on the neck. So we do know some subsequent details that have emerged, that give some kind of context to that video. In my view, there was no need for Derek Chauvin to put his knee on George Floyd's neck. At that point, George Floyd was subdued. He was on the ground. I believed that he was handcuffed. I think it was a horrible thing to do. And certainly the optics of it are so awful. So awful. And of course you should do the right thing because you're doing the right thing. But my gosh, it was just, in my view, it was so stupid for so many reasons. And especially even if that is police protocol, don't do that. And there's no need to do that with someone like George Floyd who was subdued. And so I really want to inject some nuance into this conversation because one of the things I found after George Floyd and the whole reaction to it is that people tended to succumb to binary ways of thinking. It was either, you deny that there was any lethal fentanyl in George Floyd's system, and Derek Chauvin is a pig and he's a racist and he murdered George Floyd and policing is corrupt and you're either like so in that camp or you were so in denying all of those things. Do you see what I mean, Sean? I found that people, or those in the chat, found that people got very extreme and binary with their thinking. And it was sort of similar during COVID. I remember there were people who would say, well, I think that some of these COVID lockdowns, these restrictions are ridiculous, but I'm going to wear masks and I'm going to social distance because I don't want to be a COVID denier. And it's like, why is it that binary? Why is it either you're a mask wearing 10 times jabbed, speaking from the window, COVID, proselyte, or you're a COVID denier and you never wear masks and you never consider the vaccine and you think the virus is a hoax. Like, why is it the binary? And I found that with George Floyd too. And so what I want to say right now is that I'm trying to inject some nuance here, where the evidence right now indicates that Derek Chauvin did not kill George Floyd, that the lethal amount of fentanyl in George Floyd's system killed George Floyd. That is true. But also, I think we can all acknowledge, at least in my view, that Derek Chauvin should not have put the knee on the neck of George Floyd. That was an unnecessary thing to do. I'm going to pause for a moment because I know I sort of opened up a can of worms with this discussion. Yes, people are writing 2 things can be true at once. It was a bad idea to have the knee on the neck for that long and still be able to realize that it wasn't against procedure. Thank you. Thank you. But why is it so hard for people to just acknowledge that? This is the thing that I really try to do in my commentary and the way I live my life and so many things. I really try to get to what the truth is. Really, just what is the truth? And the truth is often 2 answers at once, or it's a nuanced thing. I'll give a final example on this point because I do believe it's really important, and we see this binary way of thinking so much in our political discourse. I was chatting with a girlfriend recently about modern day feminism and how I think, and I've done episodes on this show about this before, how I think that modern day feminism has contributed to so much of the malaise among women. Modern day feminism has fed us these lies that if we take off our clothes and we act as promiscuously as men, then we will be as happy as men, or that we want casual sex as much as men. It's contributed to this whole hookup culture. And it's contributed to women thinking that their career is more important than getting married. Anyway, I had this conversation with a friend, and I was tracing the roots of some of this cultural malaise to modern day feminism. And her response to me was so interesting. She said, Julie, I think you're right that some of the things that you mentioned are an outgrowth of feminism, but I don't want to criticize feminism because the same people who criticize feminism are the same people who think that women shouldn't have a right to vote. And I said to her, no, that's not. First of all, can you name me someone right now in American life who's trying to repeal women's rights to vote? Come on. It's ridiculous, but it shows this binary way of thinking. I'm not going to criticize feminism in the modern day because if I'm criticizing feminism in the modern day, then I'm saying that the entirety of the feminist movement, has been terrible. No, let's actually get our heads back, screwed on straight, and let's realize that the truth has nuance. And to criticize something doesn't mean that you're criticizing it in its entirety, or to praise something doesn't mean you're praising everything in its entirety. It's like America. If you love America, then it means that you endorse slavery or you endorse Jim Crow. Come on. It's not true. Nuance. Nuance is the name of the game. But this is a relevant discussion because this was all of the stuff that I was realizing during the George Floyd stuff. So I want to show you, I told you I have screenshots of so many of these posts from 2020. I want to show you some of them because this, more than anything else, social media is what red pilled me. By the way, I'm wearing red today. I didn't even realize it. It's kind of apropos. I'm wearing red because I was red pilled. I'm wearing red because I was at Harvard at the time, and that was a big part of my experience. Crimson, it's a symbolic thing to be wearing today. But social media, people were so psycho during 2020 on social media, and that was, for many of us in lockdown, that was all we had. We weren't going out and talking with people or seeing people. So our public forum at the time was social media. And this is the thing that made me conservative. So after George Floyd died and the video came out, we all remember the rioting, the looting, the crazy protests, which, were supposedly in accordance with public health, but then going outside for any other reason besides protesting against racism was being a COVID denier, but protesting racism was in accordance with public health. Got it. But we remember all of those crazy protests and rioting and looting. And then these people who I went to high school and college with were posting the most unhinged, nonsensical, entitled, wagging the finger posts about white supremacy. Here's just one of them. And let's laugh at this because it really is deserving of laughter. So this is someone who I went to school with. Ready? The end of patriarchal domination and the end of white supremacy are absolutely inextricable. White supremacy is also a losing game for white women. This is why solidarity in politics and feminism are truly an imperative. There's no feminism that excludes or decenters the specifically racialized experiences of patriarchy of BIPOC women. The proximity to white male privilege that white womanhood affords is frankly ephemeral and a convenient farce propagated to maintain complacency. A white heteropatriarchy is only interested in protecting itself and its capital. While white women fall into that second category, they're also protected. And when they stop proving valuable or try to disrupt the system to any extent, they're cast aside and demonized. So here's how I look at a rant like that. If that made sense to you, you got to get your brain checked. If that didn't make sense to you, then that's a good sign that you may be a clear thinker. I said this recently on the show. I read some DEI statement that was talking about, putting as many isms and ists and all these crazy constructed academic words into one sentence. And I read that and I said just what I said now. If that doesn't make sense to you, you are told that you're doing something wrong. You're told that you're insufficiently anti-racist. You're insufficiently, anti-patriarchy. You haven't done the work. You haven't done a reconnaissance mission on your psyche to exact all of the elements in your brain of your racism and your sexism and your latent bigotry. That's what you're told, that if you don't understand that, then that's your problem. But it's literally the opposite. If you don't understand that, that means that you're a clear thinker, because that makes no damn sense. But I was seeing this. I can't emphasize this enough. I was on social media. I was seeing, and you guys who are watching may be thinking, well, actually, none of you are thinking this because you went through this and you know. This was not just one person. This was so many people on social media posting these kinds of things. And that girl happened to be Black, but there were all of these white women, and this is what drove me nuts. There were all of these white people who were trying to be so, what's the word? I'm forgetting it. It means performative, virtue signaling. And they're posting, these Maoist self-criticism sessions for their white privilege. And they're like, I, as a white woman, I am listening right now. I am recognizing that I'm racist. It's like, come on. We should all listen, of course. And there were some things, and keyword some, that came out during that BLM summer that were good and that were deserving of our notice. For instance, I think one positive thing that came out of that is that police now wear body cameras. Only some police departments prior to 2020 required body cameras. To my knowledge, it is now the case that most police departments in the country have body cameras. Okay, that's a thing that we should listen to. That's a thing that we should, change. I'm all for appropriate listening. But these white women that would get up there and, apologize for having white skin. Come on. Absolutely ridiculous. Remember the black square? Do you remember that on social media? By the way, remember when Nancy Pelosi and all of the Democrats in Congress, they wore like the African scarf and then they kneeled for 8 minutes to honor George Floyd? The amount of irrationality during that time, we need to keep a chronicle of it and then make it a sitcom. It was just so funny. Remember the black square? You had to post the black square on Instagram to prove to everyone that you were anti-racist. And then after the black square thing, this happened. This is delete the square. No more black square. This is a screenshot from the time. Delete the square. The Instagram algorithm is merging Blackout Tuesday posts with Black Lives Matter hashtag. This is obstructing vital information. I saw a post like that. I saw other posts like, don't post the black square. You're just being performative. So everything you did was wrong. This was the tornado of craziness that we were all living in. I'll just show you a few more for the sake of old times. This was another post. Someone put on Instagram that you were being violent if you weren't continuing to post about Black Lives Matter, because that was one of the things. People would go after you on social media, people my age. If you were not posting for Black Lives Matter, if you weren't posting infographics about police brutality or about mass incarceration or about, the school to prison pipeline or all of the things that they demanded that you post about, then it means that you were being racist, and indeed it means you were being violent. You can see here that that girl said that you were being, quote, violent. And so I bring up that post specifically because posts like that marked such a turning point in the psyche of Julie Hartman. Because I looked at that and I said, wait a minute. People are throwing around these terms like violence so superfluously and so recklessly. That is not what violence means. Violence is violence. Punching someone in the face or shooting someone is violence. Not posting on Instagram, you could argue that it's insensitive. You could argue that person is reneging on their responsibilities in the moment. You could say a lot of things, but it's certainly not violent. And so that was a moment for me, and I think this is where language really started to become distorted. where now it's just kind of commonplace for all of us. We're so used to people saying, that they're offended by something innocuous. We're so used to people calling everything racist or everything violent or everything discrimination. We've become desensitized to it. But I want us to remember this moment because it was one of the most formative of my life. I was growing up during this time. I was becoming an adult. So I am really well poised to remember what life was like before then and then what life is like after then. And I can tell you from my memory that these terms started to become really twisted and really misused during Black Lives Matter. And what the post that you just saw is total proof. And so now we shouldn't be surprised when we see, for instance, I reported on this recently in Illinois. They're trying to change right now the Abused and Neglected Child Reporting Act in the state of Illinois to say that a, quote, abused child is one whose parents deny them gender affirming care. This is now mainstream. I said at the beginning of this episode, George Floyd changed the world and changed America because it made leftism leach into the mainstream. And one effect of that is that it led to people twisting language and twisting words and then making that a part of the law. And so now that the word abuse in the state of Illinois is again, the law thankfully hasn't been passed yet, but they're trying to get this law passed saying that the term abuse means that your parents don't give you gender affirming care. By the way, that term, even gender affirming care, is another example of the twisting of language. Gender affirming care is gender denying abuse. But all of that distortion, I'm telling you, it really became mainstream in this moment, this George Floyd moment. In addition to the language, I'll just quickly tell you, and then we'll talk about when I got on to Dennis Prager's show, and then we'll wrap up. But in addition to the language, I also saw how faulty a lot of people's arguments were. And I want to compare what I saw then to October 7th, okay? Because people are writing, and literally the most recent comment is about this, how, oh, wow, this is it. Thank you, Tessa Jane, for writing this. I was part of it. I supported them. And then they ran for the hills on October 7th. This is exact. Thank you for the segue, Tessa Jane, because this is exactly what I'm about to talk about. So I want to tell you why what happened on October 7th was not surprising to me, and why I saw the seeds of it during BLM, because a lot of people like you in the comments are saying that October 7th was their moment, okay? During Black Lives Matter, I remember the arguments that were being used to justify things. And I'll give you an example. When people were rioting and looting, and we all remember the videos during BLM of people smashing in windows, running into stores, taking, Nike shoes, going and setting buildings on fire, wreaking havoc in the cities. I remember the arguments that my peers and many in the mainstream media used to justify that violence. You know what they said? They said that Black people were taking back what was theirs. I remember seeing social media posts. You can't be mad at people for rioting and looting because they're taking back what's theirs. And I remember looking at that and going, we can't go down this road of judging, of treating people unequally and applying different standards to people because they are Black or because they are this or because they are that. We lament that we did that in the past in the opposite way. We lament that there was a time in our country where we were racist and we did treat Black people, for example, differently than others. And that was terrible. But we can't do it in the reverse direction. We can't give special privileges or special carve-outs to others or special arguments to others because of their race, religion, or skin color or whatever. That leads us down a very bad road. And so now, in a post-October 7th moment, if we're tracing the arguments, what do people say about Hamas and what they did on October 7th. They go, well, Hamas was justified for raping and killing and beheading Israelis on October 7th. You know why? Because they're taking back what's theirs. That was the same argument. That what Hamas did was justified because they're taking back what's theirs. I draw a direct line from that argument to the rioting and looting argument of BLM, and that's why I saw it sooner. And I'm not saying that as like I saw it sooner. I'm great. People have their moments of awakening. I have to be honest with you. It's a little. I can't believe that a lot of other people didn't see it sooner, because this, in my view, with respect, this was so obvious. But thankfully, a lot of people are waking up in the post October 7th moment, because there were these parallels of using these faulty arguments. And by the way, October 7th was when a lot of people became disillusioned with BLM. Look at this paraglider post. Remember this? BLM posts in support of the Hamas paragliders because Hamas was just taking back what is theirs. So I sincerely hope, and I don't mean this in a condescending or any kind of way, I just sincerely hope that people who supported BLM are now finally awake to all of this nonsense. Okay, let's talk about when I discovered Dennis Prager, and then we'll wrap it up. But I'm seeing comments. You know what I'll have to do? We'll have to do a follow-up on this show, because I don't want to take advantage of your time. I don't want to go on too long, but some of these comments are really, really good. And we should do a follow-up. So thank you so much, and keep them coming. So I had this whole waking up moment because of what I just told you, the arguments that were being used that I thought were despicable, the language, the social media posts. I remember at my high school, they created this Instagram account to like expose the racism at my high school. I went to a private all-girls high school here in Los Angeles, about 85 girls in a grade. Let me tell you something. In my entire 6 years of going to that school, I did not see or hear of one instance of racism. Not one. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Maybe it did. And if it did, I will be the first person to defend the victim and say that it was wrong. But what I will not do is bow down and capitulate to invisible racism. And because that harms real racism. And during BLM, with both Harvard and my high school, which I won't name my high school by name, but you can probably find it, people were going after teachers and students at my high school, bringing up innocuous examples of something that they said in class that exposed their latent racism. And I saw all of these people from my high school who I thought I respected, who I thought were solid, good-headed, clear-eyed girls. And they were liking these social media posts, and they were commenting, this school is so racist, and that one, literally, you can't imagine how innocuous the examples were. It was, I can't think of one specifically, but it was at the same level of microaggression. Someone complimented a black person's hair, and that means that they were racist. And I'm looking at all these people who I thought I really liked, and they were just bowing down to the mob. So I decided I was going to figure out if there were people who weren't bowing down to the mob. And I went online and I looked up, what do conservatives think about police? Because I was just so done with it all. And up popped Prager University. And I think the first video I watched actually wasn't about policing. It was Larry Elder's video on fatherlessness. And that, my friends, is when the life of Julie Hartman permanently changed. I was never the same individual after watching that video. Because then I discovered PragerU. Then I started watching all of these other 5-minute videos on everything, on immigration, on on the prison system, on how to be a healthy, happy person. Dr. Stephen Marmer has this video on how to grow up. There were fantastic videos on feminism, on God, on all of these subjects. And I didn't sleep that night because I went online looking for some counterpoints about police, and I certainly found them. But then I basically found all of conservatism on a website. And I was so red-pilled. And the great thing about that was that it made me discover the truth. I was watching these PragerU videos and I remember my feeling, and it's such a powerful feeling, you guys. And I, at the risk of sounding corny and trite, it's what I hope to bring to other people every day. I want them to feel this feeling that I had when I discovered PragerU. I was sitting there watching the videos and I thought, these people are telling the truth. They're telling the truth. And when you hear the truth spoken, it is so damn powerful. It is freeing. It is clarifying. It is decent. It is empowering. I watched it and I went, oh my God, this is the truth. And I discovered all of these things. And by the way, my friends remember during this time, we laugh about it now. I was like a little crazy person. I would write them these emails, these long paragraph emails, and I would go, did you know that in 2019, only 14 unarmed Black people were killed by the police? Do you know that 75% of Black children grow up in the home without a father? Did you know that 75% of Black boys can't read in the state of California? I was so red-pilled. I was so jazzed by the truth that I should have brought in some of these emails. They're hilarious. I was quoting Tom Sowell. I was quoting Larry Elder. In one of the emails I wrote to my friends, and I was like, guys, did you know that there are Black conservatives? Which is so funny, but it shows you how little I knew and how little they knew, that we were amazed that there were Black conservatives. But I discovered the truth. I discovered the truth about Black America. And that it wasn't policing that was the main problem in Black America. But then I discovered the truth about America. And Dennis Prager is the guy who did it for me. Not only did I watch his 5-minute videos, but once I discovered him, I ordered his book on the American value system. It's called Still the Best Hope. Everyone should read that book, even if you're, a tried and true conservative, patriot, et cetera. Everyone should read that book because he, in his fantastically concise and profound Dennis Prager way, explains and advocates for the American value system. But the best part is that he actually only really does the first part, because by explaining the American value system, you advocate for the American value system. Because when people are aware of what the American value system is, you realize that there is no better system on planet Earth. And so I'm taking you back to me. I was in that moment. I was at home with my parents during COVID lockdown. I was emerging from political liberalism. I was learning the truth about policing and about prisons and about and all these kind of things I was being brainwashed about. But you know what was so beautiful that was happening in that moment? I was falling in love with my country. I was learning, I had never heard the term e pluribus unum, out of many one. That one term, e pluribus unum, that's all you need to know really about what makes America so unique. Because no other country practices e pluribus unum the way that we do. E pluribus unum means out of many one, out of many nationalities, religions, backgrounds, etc. We are all one American people. If you come to this country legally and you pass the citizenship test and you adopt our values, you are considered truly American. It doesn't matter if you've been in America for 5 minutes. If you do that, you are considered an American. How cool is that? It's one of the coolest things in the world. You can go to Japan and be in Japan for years. You can get citizenship. You can learn the language. You can adopt the cultural mores, and you will never be considered fully Japanese. You can go to France. You can go to Germany. You can go to basically any other country. and do what I just said, but you'll never truly be considered to be a part of that country unless you are of the ethnicity or speak the language. But that is not true of my beloved America. In America, see, this is the thing, and I will wrap it up soon. I know I'm kind of going on and on, but I feel like in that moment, I felt like I was shot out of a cannon, and right now I feel like I've been shot out of a cannon because I'm reliving the glory. I'm reliving discovering the truth and discovering love of country, and that's what I want to bring to you. But what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. the Japan, you can't go to another country and be considered fully e pluribus unum. I was saying something, but I lost it because I was fearing that I was going on. But basically, this is what it is. I fell in love with my country, and I remember, so important, because of this whole thing made me realize that we in America, we are diversity, we are equality, and we are inclusion. So I'm in this moment and I'm looking at all these things that all these people are saying about, we need more diversity. And then I'm discovering that America is diversity. And if only people understood that, but America is the right kind of diversity. And so anyway, I just discovered love of country. I became conservative, and then I decided to email Dennis. And I reached out to him and I said, I want to thank you so much for your influence on my thinking. You've changed my life. You've made me a healthier, happier person. And I hate to leave you on a cliffhanger, but I think I'm going to leave it there for today. Because I've said a lot. I've told you about my story, but I'm going to leave it there. And we're going to do a follow-up episode where I'm actually going to play for you that moment where I went on the air with Dennis and tell you what I was thinking and how that all changed. Because, again, it's a story about me in some ways, but it's really a story about America, and it's a story about what a lot of other people were thinking and realizing. So I'm gonna leave it here. But I want to read some of your comments. Thank you all very much for joining me with this discussion. And the TLDR, again, is that this moment 4 years ago really, really changed everything. It changed everything. But there are still some people who don't think that it changed everything. They argued actually that the George Floyd moment didn't go further enough. Let's look here at USA Today. This is the headline from USA Today about the anniversary of George Floyd's death. They say that it has been 4 years since George Floyd's death, and it reads, quote, "For a moment, George Floyd's murder changed everything. Those days are gone." And then they go through talking about how, the Supreme Court reversed affirmative action. I'm reading directly. Republican-led legislators stamping out Black history courses. Republicans, quote, opposing the Black national anthem at the Super Bowl. This requires a follow-up because not only do I want to do the whole Dennis thing, but I want to talk about this fissure. Because as I said, there are some of us who result from that George Floyd moment being awake. But there are a lot of others who have taken the hard left road. And they are just getting deeper into not being awake. And that is the pivotal moment that we find ourselves right now in this country. So we'll continue. And thank you again for being here. Please email me, julie@julie-hartman.com with your comments. I would love to hear what you think about the first part of the journey experience that I told you, and if you can relate to it. And I so appreciate your being here. I'll see you all tomorrow at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern for another live show. Take care. I'll see you soon.